Napoleon coup d'état in 1799 unsuccessful. Napoleon coup d'état in 1799 to take control of French politics. Napoleon Bonaparte, born Napoleon Bonaparte, August 15, 1769 to May 5, 1821, later known by his regnal name Napoleon I. Napoleon Bonaparte, later known by his regnal name Napoleon I, was a French emperor and military commander who rose to prominence during the French Revolution and led successful campaigns during the Revolutionary Wars. Napoleon played a key role in the French Revolution, 1789–99, served as first consul of France, 1799–1804, and was the first emperor of France, 1804–14/15. Today Napoleon is widely considered one of the greatest military generals in history. Learn about Napoleon's role in the French Revolution, 1789–99. Early in the 19th century, Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769–1821, popularly known as Napoleon I, was a French military commander and emperor who subjugated most of Europe. During the French Revolution, 1789–1799, Napoleon, who was born on the island of Corsica, quickly advanced through the military ranks. Following his coup d'état in 1799 to take control of French politics, Louis crowned himself emperor in 1804. Napoleon was a cunning, aspirational, and expert military tactician who successfully fought against numerous alliances of European countries to grow his empire. However, Napoleon abdicated the throne 2 years later and was banished to the island of Elba following a catastrophic French invasion of Russia in 1812. He made a brief comeback to power during his 100 Days campaign in 1815. He abdicated once more following a terrible defeat at the Battle of Waterloo, and he was banished to the isolated island of St. Helena, where he passed away at the age of 51. Napoleon's education and early military career. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, on the Mediterranean island of Corsica. He was the second of 8 surviving children born to Carlo Bonaparte, 1746–1785, a lawyer, and Letizia Romolino Bonaparte, 1750–1836. Although his parents were members of the minor Corsican nobility, the family was not wealthy. The year before Napoleon's birth, France acquired Corsica from the city-state of Genoa, Italy. Napoleon later adopted a French spelling of his last name. As a boy, Napoleon attended school in mainland France, where he learned the French language, and went on to graduate from a French military academy in 1785. He then became a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment of the French army. The French Revolution began in 1789. And in just 3 years, revolutionaries had declared a French republic and toppled the monarchy. The French Revolution, which started in 1789 and ended with Napoleon Bonaparte's ascendancy in the late 1790s, was a pivotal moment in world history. Throughout this time, the French people fundamentally changed their political environment, toppling long-standing establishments like the monarchy and the feudal system. Disgust with the French was what started the unrest. Aristocracy and the economic policies of King Louis XVI, who, like his wife Marie Antoinette, died the guillotine. The French Revolution demonstrated the power inherent in the will of the people, which helped to shape modern democracies, even as it descended into a bloodbath during the Reign of Terror. And the economic policies of King Louis XVI, who, like his wife Marie Antoinette, died the guillotine. The French Revolution demonstrated the power inherent in the will of the people, which helped to shape modern democracies, even as it descended into a bloodbath during the Reign of Terror. During the early years of the Revolution, Napoleon was largely on leave from the military and home in Corsica, where he became affiliated with the Jacobins, a pro-democracy political group. In 1793, following a clash with the nationalist Corsican governor, Pascal Paoli, 1725–1807, the Bonaparte family fled their native island for mainland France, where Napoleon returned to military duty. The revolutionary people's unrest stemmed from their discontent with monarchy, feudalism, and corruption, as well as their hunger and food shortages. This resistance eventually culminated to revolution. Causes of the French Revolution. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette continued to live opulently even after inheriting enormous debts from their predecessor, as seen by their support of the American colonies' victory over the British. The French government was on the verge of an economic collapse by the late 1780s. Even worse, a national famine struck in 1788 as a result of extensive crop failures. At its height, the average worker spent over 88% of his pay on bread alone due to the spike in costs. Another issue was unemployment, which the public partially attributed on recently lowered customs tariffs between France and Britain. Violent food riots broke out at bakeries, granaries, and other food storage facilities around France after a hard winter. By the end of the 18th century, King Louis XVI's lavish spending and France's costly involvement in the American Revolution had brought the country dangerously close to financial ruin. In addition to the royal treasuries being empty, the urban poor and peasants had become uneasy due to multiple years of bad harvests, drought, cattle sickness, and increasing bread prices. Many turned to rioting, looting, and striking as a way of expressing their frustration and resentment toward a dictatorship that imposed high taxes without offering any respite. Charles Alexander de Calonne, the Controller General of Louis XVI, presented a financial reform plan in the fall of 1786 that contained a universal land tax from which the aristocratic classes would no longer be exempt. Estates General. In an effort to garner support for these policies and put an end to an increasingly violent aristocratic rebellion, the king convened the Estates General, les États Généraux, an assembly that represents France's clergy, nobility, and middle class, for the first time since 1614. The conference was scheduled for May 5, 1789, in the meantime grievance lists, or cahiers de doléances, to be delivered to the monarch would be gathered by delegates from each of the three estates in each place. Louis XVI and the Tennis Court Oath. Louis XVI called the long-dormant Estates General, a national parliament composed of three orders based on social class, the clergy, First Estate, nobility, Second Estate, and commoners, Third Estate, in an effort to settle the situation. The Third Estate might yet be defeated by its two rivals in a vote, although representing roughly 98% of the populace. Its deputies instantly began to demand a bigger voice as a result of this disparity. They then proclaimed themselves to be a new body known as the National Assembly after initially making no progress. On June 20, 1789, they discovered that the doors to their meeting place were closed. So, they assembled in a neighboring indoor tennis court and, against the king's wishes, they took an oath known as the Tennis Court Oath, promising never to split up until they drafted a new written constitution. The National Assembly. The National Assembly, which is the lowest house of the French Parliament, meets at the Palais Bourbon. Situated opposite the Place de la Concorde, on the rive gauche of the Seine, lies the 7th arrondissement of Paris. The National Assembly pronounced the lower house of the bicameral French Parliament under the Fifth Republic, the upper house being the Senate. Louis XVI reluctantly agreed to the National Assembly when a large number of aristocrats and clergy joined it. However, he also dispatched multiple army units into Paris and its environs, raising concerns that he would use force to dissolve the assembly. Then, on July 11, the monarch fired his only non-noble minister, Jacques Necker, who was well-liked and progressive. The next day, protesters descended upon Paris, intimidating royalist soldiers to the point where they evacuated the capital. Along with burning down the majority of Paris' despised customs posts, which levied fees on commodities, crowds also started a mad hunt for food and weapons. Unrest continued on the morning of July 14, when an unruly mob seized roughly 32,000 muskets and some cannons from the Hôtel des Invalides, a military hospital, prior to turning its sights on the large quantity of gunpowder stored in the Bastille. Storming of the Bastille. On July 14, the governor of the Bastille, Bernard-René Delaunay, watched in horror as a sizable and expanding crowd of enraged revolutionaries neared the stronghold. He brought revolutionary delegates inside for negotiations after receiving a demand to surrender. French revolutionaries stormed the Bastille. On July 14, 1789, mutinous troops and Parisian revolutionaries seize and demolish the Bastille, a royal prison and fortress that had come to represent the oppression of the Bourbon rulers. The French Revolution, which saw the toppling of monarch Louis XVI and the execution of tens of thousands of people, including the monarch and his wife Marie Antoinette, began with this momentous event. The French Revolution lasted for 10 years. By 1789 summer, France was rapidly heading toward revolt. The military governor of the Bastille, Bernard-René Jourdan Delaunay, asked for reinforcements because he thought the revolutionaries would target his stronghold. The Bastille received 250 barrels of gunpowder on July 12 from royal authorities. Launay then led his soldiers inside the enormous stronghold and raised the two drawbridges. Louis XVI is said to have given him a warm embrace, promised not to open fire, and made no formal commands. But while the talks continued, the audience outside grew restless. Perhaps some thought their delegates had been arrested. Eventually, a party of men scaled an outside wall and lowered a drawbridge to the courtyard, allowing the crowd to spill inside the Bastille. When Delaunay saw that soldiers were getting ready to lower a second drawbridge, he broke his pledge and ordered the firing. The raid resulted in the deaths of over 100 attackers and several injuries, although the royalists only lost one soldier. On July 14, at first light, a sizable throng equipped with swords, muskets, and other homemade weaponry started to assemble around the Bastille. Although Launay's men managed to contain the crowd, he flew a white flag of surrender above the Bastille as more and more Parisians converged on the citadel. 7 captives were released, Launay and his soldiers were brought into custody, and the gunpowder and guns of the Bastille were taken. When Launay got to the Hôtel de Ville, where he was supposed to be taken into custody and put on trial by a revolutionary council, a mob grabbed him and killed him. The capture of the Bastille symbolized the end of the Ancien regime and provided the French revolutionary cause with an irresistible momentum. In 1792, the monarchy was abolished and Louis and his wife Marie Antoinette were sent to the guillotine for treason in 1793. The French Revolution was plotted on a tennis court. Explore some well-known facts about the French Revolution, some of which may not be so factual after all. 1. Fiction: the poorest citizens of France revolted during the French Revolution. Contrary to popular belief, the poorest residents of France played a relatively small role in the French Revolution, as evidenced by works such as Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. Professions and intellectuals such as lawyers, physicians, journalists, writers, and even some nobility, such as the American revolutionary hero Comte de Mirabeau, the Marquis de Condorcet, and the Marquis de Lafayette, rose up in 1789 to overthrow the monarchy and form the National Assembly. The majority of the crowd that stormed the Bastille consisted of craftsmen and salespeople, while the militant sans-culottes, or without pants, who claimed to be speaking for the lower classes, were mostly merchants, artisans, and clerks. 2. Fact: the key meeting to plan the French Revolution took place on a tennis court. This is all accurate. May 1789 saw a gathering of French nobles, clergy, and commoners at the Palace of Versailles amid a financial crisis and social turmoil. The vast majority of French citizens, known as the Third Estate, were tired of being outvoted by the two more privileged estates and formed the National Assembly, which would run separately from the king. In punishment for this act of rebellion, King Louis XVI closed the meeting hall of the Estates General and the deputies. The assembly was called to order on June 20th, and after some quick thinking, they met at Versailles Jeu de Paume, an indoor tennis court. There, they decided not to dissolve until France passed a new official constitution. A week after the famous tennis court oath, the king was forced to give in and allow the first two estates to join the National Assembly. Humiliated by this defeat and spurred on by his advisors, Louis began assembling army troops, including many foreign mercenaries, around Paris and Versailles, and on July 12 he dismissed his popular finance minister, Jacques Necker. Rumors spread of an impending. It was often said by Voltaire that all Parisians needed was the comic opera and white bread. However, bread has also been associated with the French Revolution and other unpleasant aspects of French history. On July 14, 1789, a raid on the medieval stronghold of the Bastille started as a search for weapons and wheat to bake bread. The French Revolution was obviously caused by a multitude of grievances more complicated than the price of bread, but bread shortages played a role in stoking anger toward the monarchy. Marie Antoinette's supposed quote upon hearing that her subjects had no bread, "Let them eat cake," is entirely apocryphal, but it epitomizes how bread could become a flashpoint in French history. In the French city of Lyon as early as 1529, riots were caused by poor grain harvests. Thousands of people plundered and burned wealthy people's homes during the so-called Grande Rebellion, Great Rebellion, eventually dumping grain from the city granary onto the streets. Things only got worse in the 18th century. Since the 1760s, the king had been counseled by physiocrats, a group of economists who believed that the wealth of nations was derived solely from the value of land development and that agricultural products should be highly priced. Under their counsel, the crown had tried intermittently to deregulate the domestic grain trade and introduce a form of free trade. It was unsuccessful. Food shortages and exorbitant prices incited a wave of popular ire in the cities and villages of the Paris Basin in late April and early May of 1775. In a little over 3 weeks, there were more than 300 recorded riots and grain plundering expeditions. The Flower War was the term given to the popular protest movement. Before advancing into Paris and the surrounding countryside, the rioters broke into Versailles. In the 1780s, a number of causes contributed to the difficulties becoming more severe. Without a matching increase in native grain production, there had been a massive population increase in France, from 1720 to 1789, an increase of 5 to 6 million. Another big problem was that the majority of French people refused to consume anything but a diet consisting of cereals. In the previous administration, bread probably made up between 60 and 80% of a wage earner's family's budget, thus even a slight increase in grain costs may cause unrest. The seeds of revolution had been sown. The seeds of revolution had been sown, as English agriculturalist Arthur Young saw while touring France in the years preceding the French Revolution. Everything conspires to render the present period in France critical. The want of bread is terrible. Accounts arrive every to keep the markets peaceful. Take a minute to distance yourself from the areas where riots and disturbances are occurring and call in the military. The king was known as Le Premier Boulanger du Royaume, first baker of the kingdom, since it was his duty to guarantee his citizens' food supply. According to Jacques Necker, his finance minister, King Louis XVI was eating Maslin bread, a lower-class bread, as a sign of sympathy with peasants who did not have access to wheat. Unlike the elite manchet white bread, which is made by sifting wholemeal flour to remove the wheat germ and bran, and which implied one had enough wheat at one's disposal to discard a bulk of it in the process, Maslin bread is made from a blend of wheat and rye. It's one of the most famous quotes in history. Subjects had no bread, Marie Antoinette. It's among the most well-known sayings in history. When Marie Antoinette, the fiancée of French King Louis XVI, was informed that her subjects were without bread at some point in 1789, it is said that she sniffed and said, "Chou ils mangent de la brioche, let them eat cake." With that insensitive comment, the queen turned into a despised representation of the corrupt monarchy and ignited the revolution that culminated to her head being literally removed a few years later. But did Marie Antoinette really say those infuriating words? There was a bit argued, not according to historians. Lady Antonia Fraser, author of a biography of the French Queen, believes the quote would have been highly uncharacteristic of Marie Antoinette, an intelligent woman who donated generously to charitable causes and, despite her own undeniably lavish lifestyle, displayed sensitivity towards the poor population of France. Putting that aside, the fact that the let them eat cake narrative had been circulated for years prior to 1789 makes it even more persuasive. The story about Marie-Therese, the Spanish princess who wed King Louis XIV in 1660, was originally presented in a slightly different version. It is said that she recommended that the French consume la croûte de pâté, or the pâté's crust. Over the next century, several other 18th century royals were also blamed for the remark, including two aunts of Louis XVI. Most famously, the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau included the pâté story in his Confessions in 1766, attributing the words to a great princess, probably Marie-Therese. Marie Antoinette, who was just 10 years old when Rousseau wrote this, was most likely not the person who spoke those famous words. Marie Antoinette was 3 years away from being married to a French prince and 8 years away from being queen. Rise of the Third Estate. Naturally, a lot has changed in France's population since 1614. Even though they now made up 98% of the population, the non-aristocratic, middle-class members of the Third Estate could still be overruled by the other two bodies. The Third Estate started organizing support for equal representation and the removal of the noble veto prior to the May 5 conference. In other words, they desired voting by head rather than by status. The orders all desired more representative governance, more fiscal and judicial reform, but the nobility in particular were unwilling to give up the benefits they had long enjoyed under the old system. The French Revolution changed Europe forever, as centuries of oppression under an absolute monarchy saw France's Third Estate rise up in violent protest in July 1789. On July 14, Parisians stormed the Bastille, the fortress that stood as a symbol of royal oppression, and would eventually execute the king, Louis XVI, and his queen Marie Antoinette a few years later. Influenced by Enlightenment thought, the revolution's ideals of liberté, égalité, fraternité led to the abolition of feudalism, suffrage for men, and state control of the Catholic Church. But revolutionaries were by no means united in their vision of this new republic, and increasingly draconian measures designed to root out suspects and traitors led to the Reign of Terror, when thousands of people across the country were executed as counter-revolutionaries. Only the inexorable rise of Napoleon Bonaparte would put an end to the revolution a decade after it had begun. It was a period when ordinary people suddenly did extraordinary things. Below are some of the key figures of the time. 7 key figures of the French Revolution. These people played integral roles in the uprising that swept through France from 1789 to 1799. 1. Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès. Photo 12/Universal Images Group by Getty Images. A portrait of Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès. A liberal clergyman named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès produced the immensely important pamphlet What is the Third Estate? Just before the Revolution. Its contention that the Third Estate, or 98% of the populace, ought to have real representation in politics evolved into the revolution's de facto platform. Though Sieyès disapproved of the Republic's corruption, he was appointed Director of the Republic in May 1799. The revolution came to an end when Sieyès and his supporters toppled the Directory in November 1799, making way for Napoleon, the well-liked military commander, to take over in the coup of 18 Brumaire. Following the coup, Bonaparte, Sieyès, and Roger Ducos were named consuls of the French Republic. 2. Marquis de Lafayette. Marquis de Lafayette led French forces in the American Revolution. Leading French forces in the American Revolution, Marquis de Lafayette was a liberal nobleman who was hailed as a military hero and defender of liberty in France. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was drafted by Lafayette with input from Abbé Sieyès and Thomas Jefferson. He was appointed head of the National Guard following the storming of the Bastille. Lafayette was charged, nevertheless, with being complicit in the royal family's attempt to escape France during the flight to Varennes in June 1791. When the National Guard opened fire on demonstrators in the Champ de Mars in 1791, his reputation took a further hit. A warrant was issued for Lafayette's arrest because of his moderate attitude against the radicalism of the Jacobin movement. He left France, but Austrian authorities caught him. 3. Jean-Paul Marat. Jean-Paul Marat was the revolution's most influential journalist. His The Revolutionary Monthly El Ami du Peuple, or The Friend of the People, adopted an extreme and unyielding attitude against the revolution's leaders, particularly the more traditional ones. Marat vigorously championed the cause of the sans-culottes, the working class. As the Commune's leader of the Committee of Surveillance, Marat is thought to have played a role in planning the September massacres of 1799, which resulted in the murder of over 1,200 suspect individuals. Marat was also a major player in the expulsion of the moderate Girondins. While he was in a therapeutic bath for his skin ailment, Charlotte Corday, a Girondin sympathizer, killed him. At his funeral, Marat was greeted as a revolutionary martyr and the entire National Convention was there. 4. Jacques-Pierre Brissac. Portrait by artist Franio Esponaville, circa 1790, of Jacques-Pierre Brissac de Warvilley, 1754–1793. Searched in the Musée Carnavalet, Paris collection. The National Convention's more conservative Girondins were led by none other than Jacques-Pierre Brissac. This faction, which was composed of financiers, traders, and merchants, backed constitutional monarchy in contrast to the more radical Montagnards, who spoke up for the interests of the urban working class. Because of his influence, the Girondins were frequently referred to as Brissodins. Brissac campaigned against Louis XVI's death after his arrest for treason, proposing a public vote on the issue. In 1792, Brissac pushed the Legislative Assembly to declare war on Austria when Prussia and Austria threatened to avenge Louis XVI, which proved disastrous for the French at first. Armed Parisians encircled the convention building on June 2, 1793. The National Convention's more conservative Girondins were led by none other than Jacques-Pierre Brissac. This faction, which was composed of financiers, traders, and merchants, backed constitutional monarchy in contrast to the more radical Montagnards, who spoke up for the interests of the urban working class. Because of his influence, the Girondins were frequently referred to as Brissodins. Brissac campaigned against Louis XVI's death after his arrest for treason, proposing a public vote on the issue. In 1792, Brissac pushed the Legislative Assembly to declare war on Austria when Prussia and Austria threatened to avenge Louis XVI, which proved disastrous for the French at first. Armed Parisians encircled the convention building on June 2, 1793. 5. Olympe de Gouges. Christoffel Fine Art. A portrait of Olympe de Gouges, anonymous, from the Paris Carnavalet Museum, 1748–1793. Playwright and Girondin Olympe de Gouges fought for women's rights in the new republic and the eradication of slavery. Women should be able to mount the speaker's platform if they were allowed to mount the scaffold, according to her 1791 Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen. Outraged, Gouges wrote to the National Assembly volunteering to stand in for Louis XVI during his trial. Her 1793 pamphlet Les Trois Urnes advocated for a constitutional monarchy, which was illegal and resulted in her execution 3 days after the remaining Girondins. Her death served as a warning to other women in politics. 6. Georges Danton. D'Agostini/Getty Images. Portrait of Georges Jacques Danton by Constance Marie Charpentier from Hotel Carnavalet, Paris. One of the political clubs of the French Revolution, the Cordeliers Club, was led by the Jacobin Georges Danton. When he served as Minister of Justice in 1792, his statement on September 2 marked the beginning of the September massacres. Although he served as the first president of the Committee of Public Safety, he started a campaign against the use of force following the Girondins' expulsion. On April 5, 1794, Danton was executed by guillotine after his former friend Robespierre accused him of being a counter-revolutionary and claimed he had benefited financially from the revolution. 7. Maximilien Robespierre. Christoffel Fine Art. Arrest of Maximilien Robespierre in engraving, Musée Carnavalet, France, July 28, 1794. Maximilien Robespierre, a renowned orator and lawyer, led the extremist Jacobins in the National Assembly. From the Estates General on, he advocated for the rights of the sans-culottes, the abolition of slavery, and universal male suffrage. How Versailles' over-the-top opulence drove the French to revolt. The palace with more than 2,000 rooms featured elaborate gardens, fountains, a private zoo, Roman-style baths, and even 18th-century elevators. Louis XIV built decadence at Versailles. Hundreds of starving and rebellious Parisian women and men, some posing as ladies, assaulted the legendary Versailles Palace, the country's magnificent seat of government, early on October 6, 1789. They rampaged through the opulent corridors, beating and decapitating palace guards and putting one gory head on a pole for public display. A bloodied guard hurried ahead to alert the monarch of the approaching deluge as the mob made its way through the marbled corridors decorated with artwork honoring the Bourbon dynasty and toward the half-dressed Queen Marie Antoinette's private apartment. The Marquis de Lafayette arrived to disperse the people after the Queen fled to King Louis XVI's apartments. The couple was compelled to move to the Tuileries Palace in Paris later that day, together with their kids. Into the vacated palace the citizens of France swarmed, finally able to see the excessive luxuries of Versailles for themselves. They walked through the echoing Hall of Mirrors, never again to be graced by the king's ponderous footsteps or the queen's soft patter. It wasn't always like this. For many years, the splendor of Versailles has been a source of tremendous pride for the French. A serious Parisian bourgeois asks an Englishman, "What is your king?" "It is true that he is ill-housed and should be pitied," wrote writer Louis Sebastian Mercier. "Look at ours. His home is in Versailles." Versailles was seen as a glorious symbol of the absolute monarch, of France's divinely ordained royal family, and of the state itself. But well before the French Revolution, some were warning that the grandeur and excesses of Versailles were in fact terrible for public relations. A generation earlier, writes Tony Spawforth in Versailles, Biography of a Palace, the Marquis d'Argenson thought that the palace had signaled the arrival on French soil of Oriental regal extravagance. It is hardly surprising that the most extravagant court in European history was created by Louis XIV, 1638 to 1715, known as the Sun King and the vainest man ever, from a humble royal hunting lodge. Versailles, with its more than 2,000 rooms, elaborate gardens, fountains, private zoo, Roman-style baths, perfect for romancing with his sweetheart, and avant-garde elevators, was built with a hefty expenditure of public cash. Architects, designers, and craftsmen of the highest caliber in Europe were entrusted with his glory. The Hall of Mirrors. Louis was financing the construction of the Hall of Mirrors, whose Baroque beauty still dazzles, during a period when the majority of his subjects led miserable lives in nothing more than wooden or stone hovels. The 240-foot-long hall is described by Francis Loring Payne in The Story of Versailles. 17 lofty windows are matched by as many Venetian-framed mirrors. Between each window and each mirror are pilasters designed by Coisevaux, Touby, and Caffieri, reigning masters of their time. Walls are of marble embellished with bronze gilt trophies. Large niches contain statues in the antique style. Louis formally moved his court to Versailles on May 6, 1682, along with his illegitimate children, mistresses, and government ministers. In addition, he insisted that aristocrats and lesser royals reside in the modest apartments assigned to them at Versailles. The goal of this action was to undermine the nobility's influence. This is exactly what happened, but it also produced a hub of excess and boredom, with hundreds of nobles jammed together, many of them with nothing to do but play, waste money, and gossip. Royal amusements broke the bank. Louis was financing the construction of the Hall of Mirrors, whose Baroque beauty still dazzles, during a period when the majority of his subjects led miserable lives in nothing more than wooden or stone hovels. In the story of Versailles, Francis Loring Payne writes of the 240-foot-long hall, 17 lofty windows are matched by as many Venetian-framed mirrors. Pilasters created by the reigning masters of their era, Coisavox, Tubi, and Caffieri, are positioned between each window and each mirror. Marble walls are adorned with bronze gilt awards, and enormous niches hold antique-style statues. On May 6, 1682, Louis officially moved his court, including his government ministers, his official family, his mistresses, and his illegitimate children, to Versailles. He also demanded that nobles and minor royals be in attendance at Versailles and live in whatever they were given modest apartments. The goal of this action was to undermine the nobility's influence. This is exactly what happened, but it also produced a hub of excess and boredom, with hundreds of nobles jammed together, many of them with nothing to do but play, waste money, and gossip. May ball at Versailles during the Carnival of 1763. Versailles was opulent from the start in every way. The lavish apparel required for the court had many aristocratic families verging on bankruptcy, and they were also expected to buy a great deal of French goods to support other businesses. The agenda was packed with activities, such as concerts, multi-course banquets, balls, and parades. The royal family enjoyed elaborate parties, plays, and pageants. Sums of money were spent on everything from the set to the clothes. Who would have thought, monsieur, that a stage decor that shone with so much order, industry, and innovation could have been created in less than a fortnight, in order to stand for perhaps a day, the Abbé de Montigny wrote. During the reign of all three of the monarchs that ruled over Versailles, gambling was another popular pastime. Payne states, nobles counted their gains by the hundred thousands, sometimes the losses of the players at the tables were enormous. Payne remembers a particular game in which the Duchess of Bourgogne, the king's grandchild, lost 600,000 francs, which her devoted grandfather covered. At Versailles, fortunes were won and lost every night, despite the fact that the majority of French people lived in poverty. Graft and embezzlement were also prevalent, along with bribery. According to Spaforth, the royal stables were frequently the focus of corruption. One nobleman was charged in 1775 for stealing 120 of the king's horses for his own use. By the time the Sun King's great-grandson, Louis XV, took the throne in 1715, public sentiment was beginning to turn against the crown and Versailles. By the time his grandson Louis XVI was crowned in 1774, Versailles had acquired a sordid reputation that was further degraded by Louis XV's love affairs and mistresses. French Revolution targets Versailles. French women wielding scythes and banging drums stormed the Palace of Versailles on October 6, 1789, during the French Revolution. When the economy collapsed in the 1780s, Versailles came to represent the crown's indifference to its subjects. There were more and more protests, including flyers showing the debauched gambling and sex and wanton spending of the royal family at Versailles appeared across the country. As 2,000 starving workers protested outside Versailles in 1786, it was said courtiers enjoyed a sumptuous ball, dancing with the greatest gaiety. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born queen, came to represent everything that was wrong with Versailles and was despised by many French people. According to Laurence Boname in Fashion and Versailles, her budget overruns on an annual clothing allowance of about $3.6 million in current spending were, in some years, more than double. The Queen would sometimes refuse a set of jewels on the grounds that the Navy could use a new battleship, and sometimes the King would make up the difference. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born queen, came to represent everything that was wrong with Versailles and was despised by many French people. According to Laurence Boname in Fashion and Versailles, her budget overruns on an annual clothing allowance of about $3.6 million in current spending were, in some years, more than double. The Queen would sometimes refuse a set of jewels on the grounds that the Navy could use a new battleship, and sometimes the King would make up the difference. Then there were the awkward visuals of the Queen's hideaway at Versailles, the epically rustic Petit Trianon, and the make-believe rural community she constructed there for her own entertainment. According to Payne, a hamlet was created at one end of the lake, with a picture mill and a dairy, fitted with marble tables and cream jugs of rare porcelain. The avalanche of tales about Versailles' excess and splendor peaked just before the Revolution. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that Versailles was among the first locations to be attacked when revolution eventually broke out. According to Spaforth, Versailles had evolved into the working center and symbol of a political and social system that many French people now saw as corrupt and anachronistic. Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen, a statement of democratic principles based on the political and philosophical theories of Enlightenment intellectuals like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was adopted by the Assembly in late August. The Assembly vowed in the document to overthrow the current regime and install a representative democracy, equal opportunity, and free speech-based society in its stead. The National Constituent Assembly found it far more difficult to draft a formal constitution because it also had to fulfill the duties of a legislature during hard economic times. Its members debated basic issues regarding the nature and scope of France's new political environment for several months. Who would be in charge of choosing delegates, for example? Which side would the clergy be loyal to, the French government or the Roman Catholic Church? The most crucial question was perhaps how much power would the monarch, whose reputation had already been damaged by an unsuccessful effort to escape the nation in June 1791, still have? Its members debated basic issues regarding the nature and scope of France's new political environment for several months. Who would be in charge of choosing delegates, for example? Which side would the clergy be loyal to, the French government or the Roman Catholic Church? The most crucial question was perhaps how much power would the monarch, whose reputation had already been damaged by an unsuccessful effort to escape the nation in June 1791, still have? Adopted on September 3, 1791, France's first written constitution echoed the more moderate voices in the Assembly, establishing a constitutional monarchy in which the king enjoyed royal veto power and the ability to appoint ministers. This compromise did not sit well with influential radicals like Maximilien de Robespierre, Camille Desmoulins, and Georges Danton, who began drumming up popular support for a more republican form of government and for the trial of Louis XVI. French Revolution turns radical. The newly elected Legislative Assembly aimed to use force to disseminate its revolutionary ideas throughout Europe, and in April 1792 it declared war on Austria and Prussia, where it suspected French émigrés were forming counter-revolutionary coalitions. On the home front, however, the political crisis took a drastic turn on August 10, 1792, when a group of rebels led by extreme Jacobins stormed the royal palace in Paris and seized the king into custody. The National Convention, which declared the end of the monarchy and the foundation of the French Republic, took the place of the Legislative Assembly the following month amidst a wave of bloodshed in which Parisian insurrectionists slaughtered hundreds of suspected counter-revolutionaries. It put King Louis XVI to the guillotine on January 21, 1793, after he was found guilty of high treason and crimes against the state. 9 months later, his wife Marie Antoinette met the same end. Reign of Terror. After the king's execution, the French Revolution entered its most violent and chaotic period due to conflict with several European nations and deep divisions within the National Convention. When the more moderate Girondins lost control of the National Convention in June 1793, the Jacobins took over and implemented a number of drastic modifications, such as the adoption of a new calendar and the extermination of Christianity. They also ushered in the brutal Reign of Terror, La Terreur, a 10-month period during which thousands of people suspected of being revolution foes were executed by hanging. Robespierre, who controlled the harsh Committee of Public Safety until his own execution on July 28, 1794, gave instructions for many of the killings. Were you aware? During the Reign of Terror, almost 17,000 persons had formal trials and were put to death. The number of people who perished in prison or without a trial is unclear. Modifications, such as the adoption of a new calendar and the extermination of Christianity. They also ushered in the brutal reign of terror, La Terror, a 10-month period during which thousands of people suspected of being revolution foes were executed by hanging. Robespierre, who controlled the harsh Committee of Public Safety until his own execution on July 28, 1794, gave instructions for many of the killings. Were you aware? During the Reign of Terror, almost 17,000 persons had formal trials and were put to death. The number of people who perished in prison or without a trial is unclear. Thermidorian reaction. The Thermidorian reaction, a moderate phase in which the French people rebelled against the excesses of the Reign of Terror, began with the execution of Robespierre. The National Convention, which was primarily made up of Girondins who had survived the Reign of Terror, adopted a new constitution on August 22, 1795, establishing France's first bicameral legislature. A 5-person directory, directoire, would be chosen by Parliament to hold executive authority. The army swiftly put a stop to the Royalists' and Jacobins' demonstrations against the new administration, commanded by the young and skilled leader Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's Coup. Year 1799. Born, August 15, 1769, Ajaccio, France. Died, May 5, 1821, Longwood House, Longwood, St. Helena, Ascension and Tristan de Cunha. The home where Napoleon lived in exile from France from December 1815 to his death in 1821. Height, 1.68 m. Napoleon's spouse, Marie-Louise, of Parma, m. 1810 to 1821. Marie-Louise was an Austrian archduchess who reigned as Duchess of Parma from April 11, 1814 until her death. She was Napoleon's second wife and as such Empress of the French and Queen of Italy from their marriage on April 1, 1810 until his abdication on April 6, 1814. Wikipedia. Born, December 12, 1791, Vienna, Austria. Died, December 17, 1847, Parma, Italy. Spouse. Charles René de Baumels, m. 1834 to 1847. Napoleon's spouse. Josephine de Beauharnais, m. 1796 to 1810. Josephine Bonaparte was Empress of the French as the first wife of Emperor Napoleon I from May 18, 1804 until their marriage was annulled on January 10, 1810. As Napoleon's consort, she was also Queen of Italy from May 26, 1805 until the 1810 annulment. She is widely known as Josephine de Beauharnais. Napoleon marries Josephine Tasker de la Pagerie, the widow of General Alexander de Beauharnais, in March 1796. He subsequently leads French forces to a series of victories against the Austrians in northern Italy. He negotiates the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797. He attempts to conquer Egypt, 1798-99, but is defeated by the British under Horatio Nelson in the Battle of the Nile. Unrest at home leads Napoleon to return to France. War Napoleon. Born, June 23, 1763, Les Trois Islets, Martinique. Died, May 29, 1814, Château de Malmaison, Rueil Malmaison, France. Spouse, Napoleon Bonaparte, m. 1796 to 1810. Alexander de Beauharnais, m. 1779 to 1794. Children: Eugene de Beauharnais, Hortense de Beauharnais. Grandchildren: Napoleon III, Josephine of Leuchtenberg. He was a French military commander and political leader who rose to prominence during the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a period of political and societal change in France that began with the Estates General of 1789, and ended with the coup of 18 Brumaire on November 1799 and the formation of the French consulate. Many of its ideas are considered fundamental principles of liberal democracy, and led successful campaigns during the Revolutionary Wars. Napoleon continued a series of conflicts known as the Napoleonic Wars. Russia, Austria, and Sweden joined Britain to counter France in what was known as the Third Coalition. The British Navy, under Horatio Nelson, destroyed the French fleet at Trafalgar on October 21, 1805. Battle of Trafalgar, October 21, 1805, naval engagement of the Napoleonic Wars, which established British naval supremacy for more than 100 years. It was fought west of Cape Trafalgar, Spain, between Cadiz and the Strait of Gibraltar. A fleet of 33 ships, 18 French and 15 Spanish, under Admiral Pierre de Villeneuve fought a British fleet of 27 ships under Admiral Horatio Nelson. At the end of September 1805, Villeneuve had received orders to leave Cadiz and land troops at Naples to support the French campaign in southern Italy. On October 19 to 20 his fleet slipped out of Cadiz, hoping to get into the Mediterranean Sea without giving battle. Nelson caught him off Cape Trafalgar on October 21. Napoleon was forced to look for other means to defeat his enemy. Austria and Russia were defeated at Austerlitz on December 2. Napoleon crushed the Prussians, who had entered the war in September 1806, at Jena and Auerstadt on October 14, and the Russians at Friedland on June 14, 1807. His triumphs were marked by the treaties of Tilsit in July that brought most of Europe to his feet. Napoleon led an army of about 600,000 into Russia in 1812, winning the Battle of Borodino, but he was forced to retreat from Moscow with disastrous losses. His army greatly weakened. He was met by a strong coalition of Allied powers, who defeated him at the Battle of Leipzig, 1813. After Paris was taken by the Allied coalition in 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba. In 1815 Napoleon escaped from Elba and, in the 100 Days Campaign, tried to restore his empire. But British and Allied forces crushed the French army at the Battle of Waterloo. This time, Napoleon was exiled to the South Atlantic island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821. His political and cultural legacy endures as a celebrated and controversial leader. He initiated many enduring reforms, but has been criticized for his authoritarian rule. He is considered one of the greatest military commanders in history, although historians still debate whether he was responsible for the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815, were a series of conflicts fought between the First French Empire under Napoleon, 1804 to 1815, and a fluctuating array of European coalitions. The Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815, were a series of conflicts fought between the First French Empire under Napoleon, 1804 to 1815, and a fluctuating array of European coalitions. The wars originated in political forces arising from the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, and from the French Revolutionary Wars, 1792 to 1802. The War of the First Coalition, 1792 to 1797. The War of the First Coalition was a set of wars that several European powers fought between 1792 and 1797, initially against the Constitutional Kingdom of France and then the French Republic that succeeded it. They were only loosely allied and fought without much apparent coordination or agreement, each power age. And the War of the Second Coalition, 1798 to 1802. The War of the Second Coalition was the second war on revolutionary France by most of the European monarchies, led by Britain, Austria, and Russia, and including the Ottoman Empire, Portugal, Naples, and various German monarchies. Prussia did not join the coalition, and Spain supported France, and produced a period of French domination over continental Europe. There were 7 Napoleonic Wars, 5 named after the coalitions that fought Napoleon, plus 2 named for their respective theaters, I. The War of the Third Coalition, 1803 to 1806. The War of the Third Coalition was a European conflict spanning from 1805 to 1806. During the war, France and its client states under Napoleon I opposed an alliance, the Third Coalition, which was made up of the United Kingdom, the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire, Naples, Sicily, and Sweden. Prussia Re. 2. The War of the Fourth Coalition, 1806 to 1807. The War of the Fourth Coalition was a war spanning 1806 to 1807 that saw a multinational coalition fight against Napoleon's French Empire, subsequently being defeated. The main coalition partners were Prussia and Russia, with Saxony, Sweden, and Great Britain also contributing. Excluding Prussia, some members of the coalition had previously been fighting France as 3. The War of the Fifth Coalition, 1809. The War of the Fifth Coalition was a European conflict in 1809 that was part of the Napoleonic Wars and the Coalition Wars. The main conflict took place in Central Europe between the Austrian Empire of Francis I and Napoleon's French Empire. The French were supported by their client states. 4. The War of the Sixth Coalition, 1813 to 1814. In the War of the Sixth Coalition, French, Guerre de la Sixtième Coalition, March 1813 to May 1814, sometimes known in Germany as the Wars of Liberation, German, Befreiungskrieg, a coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, the United Kingdom, Portugal, Sweden, Sardinia, and a number of German states defeated France and drove Napoleon into exile on Elba. After the disastrous French invasion of Russia of 1812, in which they had been forced to support France, Prussia and Austria joined Russia, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and Portugal, and the rebels in Spain who were already at war with France. The War of the Sixth Coalition saw major battles at Lutzen, Bautzen, and Dresden. The even larger Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations, was the largest battle in European history before World War I. Ultimately, Napoleon's earlier setbacks in Spain, Portugal, and Russia proved to be the seeds of his undoing. With their armies reorganized, the Allies drove Napoleon out of Germany in 1813 and invaded France in 1814. The Allies defeated the remaining French armies, occupied Paris, and forced Napoleon to abdicate and go into exile. The French monarchy was revived by the Allies, who handed rule to the heir of the House of Bourbon in the Bourbon Restoration. In the War of the Sixth Coalition, sometimes known in Germany as the Wars of Liberation, a coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, the United Kingdom, Portugal, Sweden, Sardinia, and a number of German states defeated France and drove Napoleon into exile on Elba. After the disastrous French invasion of Russia of 1. V. The War of the Seventh Coalition, 1815, 6. The Peninsular War, 1807 to 1814, and 7. The French invasion of Russia, 1812. The wars also produced several related conflicts, including the Gunboat War, 1807 to 1814, the Finnish War, 1808 to 1809, and the Anglo-Russian War, 1807 to 1812. Upon realizing the coup of 18 Brumaire, whereby he became the first consul of France in 1799, Napoleon assumed control of the politically chaotic French First Republic. He then organized a financially stable French state with a strong bureaucracy and a professional army. War broke out soon after, with Britain declaring war on France on May 18, 1803, ending the Peace of Amiens, and forming a coalition made up of itself, Sweden, Russia, Naples, and Sicily. The British fleet under Admiral Nelson decisively crushed the joint Franco-Spanish Navy in the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805. This victory secured British control of the seas and prevented a planned invasion of Britain. In December 1805, Napoleon defeated the Allied Russo-Austrian army at Austerlitz, effectively ending the Third Coalition and forcing Austria to make peace. Concerned about increasing French power, Prussia led the creation of the Fourth Coalition with Russia, Saxony, and Sweden, which resumed war in October 1806. Napoleon soon defeated the Prussians at Jena-Auerstedt and the Russians at Friedland, bringing an uneasy peace to the continent. The treaty failed to end the tension, and war broke out again in 1809, with the badly prepared Fifth Coalition, led by Austria. At first, the Austrians won a significant victory at Aspern-Essling, but were quickly defeated at Wagram. Hoping to isolate and weaken Britain economically through his continental system, Napoleon launched an invasion of Portugal, the only remaining British ally in continental Europe. After occupying Lisbon in November 1807, and with the bulk of French troops present in Spain, Napoleon seized the opportunity to turn against his former ally, depose the reigning Spanish royal family and declare his brother King of Spain in 1808 as José I. The Spanish and Portuguese revolted with British support and expelled the French from Iberia in 1814 after 6 years of fighting. Concurrently, Russia, unwilling to bear the economic consequences of reduced trade, routinely violated the continental system, prompting Napoleon to launch a massive invasion of Russia in 1812. The resulting campaign ended in disaster for France and the near destruction of Napoleon's Grande Armée. Encouraged by the defeat, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, and Russia formed the Sixth Coalition and began a new campaign against France, decisively defeating Napoleon at Leipzig in October 1813 after several inconclusive engagements. The Allies then invaded France from the east, while the Peninsular War spilled over into southwestern France. Coalition troops captured Paris at the end of March 1814 and forced Napoleon to abdicate in April. He was exiled to the island of Elba, and the Bourbons were restored to power. However, Napoleon escaped in February 1815, and reassumed control of France for around 100 days. The Allies formed the Seventh Coalition, defeated him at Waterloo in June 1815, and exiled him to the island of St. Helena, where he died 6 years later. 31. The wars had profound consequences on global history, including the spread of nationalism and liberalism, advancements in civil law, the rise of Britain as the world's foremost naval and economic power, the appearance of independence movements in Spanish America and subsequent decline of the Spanish and Portuguese empires, the fundamental reorganization of German and Italian territories into larger states, and the introduction of radically new methods of conducting warfare. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the Congress of Vienna redrew Europe's borders and brought a relative peace to the continent, lasting until the Crimean War in 185. The coalition forces of the Napoleonic Wars were composed of Napoleon Bonaparte's enemies, the United Kingdom, the Austrian Empire, Kingdom of Prussia, Kingdom of Spain, Kingdom of Naples, Kingdom of Sicily, Kingdom of Sardinia, Dutch Republic, Russian Empire, the Ottoman. The wars originated in political forces arising from the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, and from the French Revolutionary Wars, 1792 to 1802, the War of the First Coalition, 1792 to 1797, and the War of the Second Coalition, 1798 to 1802, and produced a period of French domination over continental Europe. There were 7 Napoleonic Wars, 5 named after the coalitions that fought Napoleon, plus 2 named for their respective theaters, I. The War of the Third Coalition, 1803 to 1806, 2. The War of the Fourth Coalition, 1806 to 1807, 3. The War of the Fifth Coalition, 1809, 4. The War of the Sixth Coalition, 1813 to 1814, v. The War of the Seventh Coalition, 1815, 6. The Peninsular War, 1807 to 1814, and 7. The French invasion of Russia, 1812. The wars also produced several related conflicts, including the Gunboat War, 1807 to 1814, the Finnish War, 1808 to 1809, and the Anglo-Russian War, 1807 to 1812. A Upon realizing the coup of 18 Brumaire, whereby he became the first consul of France in 1799, Napoleon assumed control of the politically chaotic French First Republic. He then organized a financially stable French state with a strong bureaucracy and a professional army. War broke out soon after, with Britain declaring war on France on May 18, 1803, ending the Peace of Amiens, and forming a coalition made up of itself, Sweden, Russia, Naples, and Sicily. The British fleet under Admiral Nelson decisively crushed the joint Franco-Spanish Navy in the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805. This victory secured British control of the seas and prevented a planned invasion of Britain. In December 1805, Napoleon defeated the Allied Russo-Austrian army at Austerlitz. Battle of Austerlitz, December 2, 1805, the first engagement of the War of the Third Coalition and one of Napoleon's greatest victories. The battle took place at Austerlitz in Moravia, now Slavkov Ubrana, Czech Republic. Napoleon's 68,000 troops defeated almost 90,000 Russians and Austrians nominally under Gen. Mikhail Kutuzov, forcing Austria to make peace with France, Treaty of Prespig, and keeping Prussia temporarily out of the anti-French alliance. Effectively ending the Third Coalition and forcing Austria to make peace. Concerned about increasing French power, Prussia led the creation of the Fourth Coalition with Russia, Saxony, and Sweden, which resumed war in October 1806. Napoleon soon defeated the Prussians at Jena-Auerstedt and the Russians at Friedland, bringing an uneasy peace to the continent. The treaty failed to end the tension, and war broke out again in 1809, with the badly prepared Fifth Coalition, led by Austria. At first, the Austrians won a significant victory at Aspern-Essling, but were quickly defeated at Wagram. Hoping to isolate and weaken Britain economically through his continental system, Napoleon launched an invasion of Portugal, the only remaining British ally in continental Europe. After occupying Lisbon in November 1807, and with the bulk of French troops present in Spain, Napoleon seized the opportunity to turn against his former ally, depose the reigning Spanish royal family and declare his brother King of Spain in 1808 as José I. The Spanish and Portuguese revolted with British support and expelled the French from Iberia in 1814 after 6 years of fighting. Concurrently, Russia, unwilling to bear the economic consequences of reduced trade, routinely violated the continental system, prompting Napoleon to launch a massive invasion of Russia in 1812. The resulting campaign ended in disaster for France and the near destruction of Napoleon's Grande Armée. Encouraged by the defeat, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, and Russia formed the Sixth Coalition and began a new campaign against France, decisively defeating Napoleon at Leipzig in October 1813 after several inconclusive engagements. The Allies then invaded France from the east, while the Peninsular War spilled over into southwestern France. Coalition troops captured Paris at the end of March 1814 and forced Napoleon to abdicate in April. He was exiled to the island of Elba, and the Bourbons were restored to power. However, Napoleon escaped in February 1815, and reassumed control of France for around 100 days. The Allies formed the Seventh Coalition, defeated him at Waterloo in June 1815, and exiled him to the island of St. Helena, where he died 6 years later. 31. The wars had profound consequences on global history, including the spread of nationalism and liberalism, advancements in civil law, the rise of Britain as the world's foremost naval and economic power, the appearance of independence movements in Spanish America and subsequent decline of the Spanish and Portuguese empires, the fundamental reorganization of German and Italian territories into larger states, and the introduction of radically new methods of conducting warfare. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the Congress of Vienna redrew Europe's borders and brought a relative peace to the continent, lasting until the Crimean War in 1853, in which between 3 and 6 million people died. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica into a family descending from Italian nobility. He was resentful of the French monarchy, and supported the French Revolution in 1789 while serving in the French army, trying to spread its ideals to his native Corsica. He rose rapidly in the ranks after saving the governing French Directory by firing on royalist insurgents. In 1796, he began a military campaign against the Austrians and their Italian allies, scoring decisive victories, and became a national hero. 2 years later he led a military expedition to Egypt that served as a springboard to political power. He engineered a coup in November 1799 and became first consul of the Republic. In 1804, to consolidate and expand his power, he crowned himself Emperor of the French. The 18 Brumaire Coup. Napoleon took part in the coup d'état, 18 Brumaire, in November 1799, where he helped to topple the French Directory. A 3-person consulate took the place of the Directory, and 5 feet 7 inches Napoleon was appointed as the first consul, elevating him to the position of most powerful man in France. Napoleon's army routed the Austrians, one of France's enduring foes, at the Battle of Marengo in June 1800 and forced them from Italy. The triumph strengthened Napoleon's position as the first consul. Furthermore, the war-weary British agreed to peace with the French in 1802, with the Treaty of Amiens, although the peace would only endure for a year. 1 year before the coup, France was at war with Great Britain. In France, Napoleon became associated with Augustin Robespierre, 1763–1794, the brother of revolutionary leader Maximilien Robespierre, 1758–1794, a Jacobin who was a key force behind the Reign of Terror, 1793–1794, a period of violence against enemies of the revolution. During this time, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of brigadier general in the army. However, after Robespierre fell from power and was guillotined, along with Augustin, in July 1794, Napoleon was briefly put under house arrest for his ties to the brothers. Napoleon was elevated to Major General in 1795 after aiding in the suppression of a royalist uprising against the revolutionary government in Paris. He was the leader of the French Republic as first consul from 1799 to 1804, then of the French Empire as Emperor of the French from 1804 until 1814, and briefly again in 1815. His political and cultural. The coup d'état of 18 Brumaire brought Napoleon Bonaparte to power as first consul of France. In the view of most historians, it ended the French Revolution and led to the coronation of Napoleon as emperor. This bloodless coup d'état overthrew the Directory, replacing it with the French consulate. Napoleon early life. August 15, 1769, Napoleon Bonaparte is born in Corsica, an island in the Mediterranean, a subject of King Louis XV of France. 1778–85, Napoleon attends military school in France, where he excels at math and history. He receives a commission as an officer in the artillery division of the French army. July 14, 1789, Parisian mobs storm the Bastille, and the French Revolution begins. August 1792 to January 1793, the French Legislative Assembly abolishes the monarchy and declares France a republic to be governed by an assembly known as the Convention. The following January, King Louis XVI is guillotined. Thousands of aristocrats, including many French military officers, flee from France. September 5, 1793, the Reign of Terror, the most radical period of the French Revolution, begins. At least 300,000 suspects are arrested, 17,000 are executed, and perhaps 10,000 die in prison or without trial. December 1793, Napoleon wins fame by defeating royalist forces supported by the British Navy in the port of Toulon. July 27 to 28, 1794, the Reign of Terror ends. August 22 to October 5, 1795, the Convention of the French Republic creates a new constitution, establishing the Directory, a 5-member committee, as the leaders of the French government. On October 5, in support of the Directory, Napoleon fires into a crowd of royalists and defeats the anti-republican forces that threaten the new government. Napoleon's legend begins. March 2 to 9, 1796, hailed as a hero for defending the Directory, young General Bonaparte is appointed commander-in-chief of the French army. 7 days later, he marries Josephine de Beauharnais. 1796 to 99, Napoleon defeats Austrian forces, and France acquires significant new territory. From 1798 to 1799, he leads the campaign to conquer Egypt, eventually abandoning his army after a series of failures. November 1799, Napoleon engineers the overthrow of the Directory in the coup d'état of 18 Brumaire, November 9. A new government called the Consulate is proposed. December 13, 1799, the Consulate is established with Bonaparte as first consul. A few months later, he leads the French army in a daring march across the Alps, defeating the Austrian army in the Battle of Marengo, June 14, 1800. 1800 to 1801, taking advantage of this period of relative peace, Napoleon takes steps to restore order in France through new policies of reconciliation. Amnesties are granted to many exiled aristocrats, who return to France. July 16, 1801, the Concordat of 1801 is signed by Pope Pius VII and Napoleon. This pact recognizes Catholicism as the religion of the vast majority of the French citizens, reconciling many French Catholics to the Consulate government and healing one of the deepest wounds of the Revolution. January 29, 1802, Napoleon sends an army to re-establish control over Saint-Domingue, the most valuable of France's colonies in the West Indies. August 3, 1802, Bonaparte becomes first consul for life. May 18 to December 2, 1804, the consulate is transformed into the empire and Napoleon is declared Emperor of the French. In December, the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine takes place at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The imperial household is officially established. March, October 1805, after Napoleon is crowned King of Italy, March 17. Austria and Russia join Britain in a new anti-French alliance. Napoleon makes plans to invade England. October 21, 1805, at the Battle of Trafalgar, the British naval fleet commanded by Admiral Nelson destroys the French navy. Napoleon's invasion plans are ended. May 18 to December 2, 1804, the consulate is transformed into the empire and Napoleon is declared Emperor of the French. In December, the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine takes place at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The imperial household is officially established. March, October 1805, after Napoleon is crowned King of Italy, March 17, Austria and Russia join Britain in a new anti-French alliance. Napoleon makes plans to invade England. October 21, 1805, at the Battle of Trafalgar, the British naval fleet commanded by Admiral Nelson destroys the French navy. Napoleon's invasion plans are ended. Of all the careers that soared to meteoric heights during the chaotic decade of the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, none was more spectacular nor impactful than that of Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769 to 1821. From an unremarkable birth into minor Corsican nobility, Napoleon would find in the revolution a path to fame, military success, and ultimately, to his role as Emperor of the French. Portrait of Napoleon Bonaparte, 1792. Henry Felix Emmanuel Villipotto, Public Domain. It would just take a cursory look at his career to see how deeply entwined the revolution would become with his destiny. His outstanding performance during the Siege of Toulon in 1793 would pave the way for his outstanding leadership of the Army of Italy, which in turn would provide him the necessary standing and clout to take over the government during the coup of 18 Brumaire. the occasion that many academics believe marked the revolution's demise. In order to comprehend this portrayal of Napoleon, one must examine the man he was at the outset of the revolution. Napoleon in 1789 was a scrawny, awkward man who did not even think of himself as French. He was by no means the image of a handsome military leader or French patriot. Indeed, in 1789, 20-year-old Napoleon was in something of an identity crisis, looking to reconcile his ambitions of literary fame with his education as a soldier, his devotion to French revolutionary ideals with his Corsican nationalism. The early revolution was undoubtedly a time of personal development for the young artillery lieutenant, the outcome of which would not only affect his own future but also the fate of all of Europe. The coup of 18 Brumaire, 9–10 November 1799, was a bloodless coup d'état in France that overthrew the government of the French Directory and replaced it with the French consulate. The coup brought Napoleon Bonaparte to power and, in the view of many historians, marked the end of the French Revolution, 1789–1799. Napoleon's role in French Revolution. And with another royalist revolt on the rise, Napoleon was summoned back to Paris to protect the government. He contributed to putting an end to the insurrection in 1795 by exercising strategic command and placing artillery on city streets. Then, with Paris among its 5 members, he gained the power of the new French administration. He rose rapidly in the ranks after saving the governing French Directory by firing on royalist insurgents. In 1796, he began a military campaign against the Austrians and their Italian allies, scoring decisive victories, and became a national hero. 2 years later he led a military expedition to Egypt that served as a springboard to political power. He engineered a coup in November 1799 and became first consul of the Republic. In 1804, to consolidate and expand his power, he crowned himself Emperor of the French. The consulate, French, le consulat, was the top-level government of France from the fall of the Directory in the coup of 18 Brumaire on November 10, 1799 until the start of the Napoleonic Empire on May 18, 1804. By extension, the term the consulate also refers to this period of French history. During this period, Napoleon Bonaparte, as first consul, premier consul, established himself as the head of a more authoritarian, autocratic, and centralized republican government in France while not declaring himself sole ruler. Due to the long-lasting institutions established during these years, Robert B. Holdman has called the consulate one of the most important periods of all French history. By the end of this period, Napoleon had engineered an authoritarian personal rule now viewed as military dictatorship. 2. Napoleon's role in the French Revolution allowed him to become the ultimate leader of the new government and to execute his vision of the government and its function. Napoleon became the founder of the modern state of France, a secular state which was largely based on a conscripted army and professional bureaucracy. He promoted a change in all areas of the ruling, particularly by establishing new laws and regulations. The affairs of all citizens were dealt with in principle on a basis of equality and according to fixed regulations, instead of being at the mercy of a monarch's whim. Such changes, however, also led to the development of dictatorship. Despite adhering to the principles of equality and effective governance, Napoleon's regime exhibited contempt of the liberal intellectual and democratic movements, thus proving unable to solve the issues outlined by the revolutionists. Nevertheless, the Napoleonic rule has managed to preserve the social gains of the revolution, which earned him the support of the reformed nobility, the notables, consisting of the successful revolutionary bourgeoisie, professional, administrators, and commercial elites. Lyons 298. French leader Napoleon Bonaparte has a complicated controversy legacy. How do historians view Napoleon Bonaparte? Was he a military genius who brought glory to France on battlefields across Europe? An emperor who improved France's government and educational, banking and transportation systems? A reformer who replaced a hodgepodge of feudal laws with a single code, stressing civil liberties and equality? that became a model for other nations? Or was he a power-hungry dictator whose wars left more than 3 million people dead? A tyrant who jailed his enemies, attacked the press and put his interests above all else? A proud, vain man who had artists paint him larger than life and who, when he became emperor, crowned himself? The answer is all of the above. Napoleon Bonaparte died 200 years ago this week, a prisoner on a small island 4,000 miles from home. But scholars still debate the successes and flaws of this man who conquered half of Europe before being defeated in battle, rejected by his people and forced into exile, with his empire destroyed. Napoleon, known by only one name after becoming emperor, was born in 1769 on the French-owned island of Corsica. As a boy, he loved starting fierce snowball fights that could last a long time. At age 16, he graduated from a military school and became an officer in the French army. A few years later, France experienced a decade-long period of turmoil called the French Revolution. High taxes, food shortages, and few available jobs led to riots aimed at replacing the king with a government in which regular people could hold power. A new French Revolutionary Army sided with the protesters. Nearby countries did not, especially after French King Louis XVI, the 16th, was executed in 1793. This led to conflicts across Europe. The revolution boosted Napoleon's career. By age 26 he was a general. After fighting in Europe and Africa, he returned to France, plotting to seize power. A new government was declared in 1799, with 30-year-old Napoleon at its head. Napoleon was born in 1769 on Corsica, an island off the south coast of France. He went to military school and became a general at 26. As France's emperor, he controlled part of what is now Italy, Belgium, Germany, Austria, Poland. His first reforms were welcomed by many people. A national bank was created, taxes were cut, education was overhauled, and the freedom of religion was established. Most important was completion of the Napoleonic Code, which collected and made clear all of the country's civil laws. The code spelled out individual freedoms, defined property rights and established equality for citizens before the law, although, back then, equality applied only to men. With France the major power in Europe, in 1804 Napoleon declared himself emperor, a higher rank than king. He reintroduced the special benefits of the monarchy, granting titles of nobility to 3,000 of his favorite citizens, including family members. His court rivaled the late king's in splendor. And his empire continued to expand, with major victories over Austria, Russia, and Prussia, northern Germany. Only Great Britain, with its mighty navy, remained a thorn in his side. In 1812, France invaded Russia, a former ally that traded with Britain despite Napoleon's policy forbidding it. Napoleon kidnapped one pope after another. On July 6, 1809, between 2 and 3 in the morning, French troops under Napoleon Bonaparte's command stormed the walls of the Quirinal Palace's gardens in Rome and entered the area of the palace inhabited by papal servants. Following a furious hour-long battle with the Swiss guards, they captured Pope Pius VII and took him to Savona, which is close to Genoa, throughout the night. It would be another 5 years before he returned to Rome. The kidnapping was the climax of the combative relationship between the global leader of the Catholic Church and the brash emperor. From the beginning of Pius VII's papacy in 1800 to the fall of Napoleon in 1815, the two men were continually at loggerheads, with the French military leader regularly infuriated by the Pope's refusal to meet his demands. However, this wasn't the first time it had happened. In 1796, during the French Revolutionary Wars, Napoleon's forces had seized Rome and detained Pope Pius VI, who passed away in France in 1799. Next, a 6-month vacancy, Cardinal Chiaramonti was chosen to the Pope the next year and assumed the name Pius VII. However, the papal tiaras were taken by the French during Pius VI's incarceration, Thus the new pope was crowned on March 21, 1800, wearing a papier-mâché tiara. Despite his desire to control Europe without rival, Napoleon understood that he needed to reach an accommodation with the all-powerful Catholic Church. In long negotiations 8 years before his kidnapping, Pius VII eventually signed the Concordat of 1801, which recognized that the Church was the religion of the great majority of the French people, but simultaneously limited the size of the French clergy and bound its members tightly to the French state, which would henceforth pay their salaries. The agreement strictly constrained the Pope's authority in France, and approved of the revolutionary government's selling off of the Catholic Church's vast land holdings in France. Napoleon sought to assert his power despite the Church's many concessions, and his lavish coronation in the Notre Dame Cathedral in 1804 offered the ideal setting for dehumanizing Pius VII. Traditionally, popes crowned the Holy Roman Emperor, but Napoleon removed the crown from the Pope's hands and put it on his own head to demonstrate to him who was now in actual power. May 18 to December 2, 1804, the consulate is transformed into the empire and Napoleon is declared Emperor of the French. In December, the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine takes place at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The imperial household is officially established. March, October 1805, after Napoleon is crowned King of Italy, March 17, Austria and Russia join Britain in a new anti-French alliance. Napoleon makes plans to invade England. October 21, 1805, at the Battle of Trafalgar, the British naval fleet commanded by Admiral Nelson destroys the French navy. Napoleon's invasion plans are ended. What was the last life of Napoleon Bonaparte? Early in 1815, Napoleon came back to power, but on June 22, 1815, he was overthrown once more. Napoleon was banished in October 1815 and lived as a vagrant on the isolated island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean until his death on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. How Napoleon's death during his exile turned into a contentious enigma. Napoleon was just 51 years old when he passed away on the island of St. Helena, having been banished from his native France and out of power. By May 5, 1821, he had been increasingly ill for a few months, experiencing constant constipation, rising weakness, and recurrent abdominal discomfort. During his final weeks, he suffered from blood clots, also known as thrombophlebitis, in several regions of his body, constant hiccups, and vomiting. The doctors who performed Napoleon's autopsy on May 6, 1821, determined that the cause of his death was stomach cancer, which was made worse by bleeding gastric ulcers. The day before Napoleon's death, he had been given a large dose of calomel, a mercury-containing medication. Armchair pathologists have been speculating whether this was actually the case ever since. Over the past century, a great number of physicians have provided a plethora of diagnoses that have practically filled books and journals.